You cannot be serious, Ambassador Harrison said, staring at the holographic pronouncement with a mixture of disbelief and growing outrage. This is galactic discrimination. You can't just expel an entire species from Council space because we're too unpredictable. High Counselor Cathar of the Galactic Council adjusted his ceremonial robes with 4 of his 8 appendages, the remaining 4 holding various data tablets displaying the damning evidence against humanity. His crystalline eyes refracted light in a pattern that Harrison had come to recognize as smug satisfaction. Ambassador, the Council's decision is final. Cathar's voice resonated with artificial translation harmonics. Humanity has violated Protocol 578B, regarding peaceful expansion no fewer than 37 times in the last solar cycle alone. Your species' inability to follow even the most basic tenets of galactic civilization has exhausted our considerable patience. Harrison fought to keep his voice level. Name one violation that wasn't eventually beneficial to the Council. Gladly. Cathar's appendage flicked across a tablet. The Orion incident. We prevented a war. By starting a smaller one, Cathar countered. The Betelgeuse anomaly. We saved 3 species from extinction. By irreversibly altering their genetic code without permission. Harrison threw his hands up. They were dying. The Proxima Protocol. Oh, come on. Nobody even remembers what the Proxima Protocol was about. Cathar's voice took on the particular harmonic that indicated he was speaking for the entire Council. Humanity has been given 97 chances to integrate properly with galactic society. You have failed 97 times. The statistical improbability of this level of consistent failure suggests it is not failure at all, but rather your species' fundamental nature. Harrison's jaw clenched. So that's it? 300 years of cooperation, and you're just kicking us out? Not kicking you out, Ambassador. The Council is merely relocating humanity to a more suitable environment. Cathar's voice softened in what Harrison assumed was meant to be conciliatory. We are granting your species exclusive rights to the Sagittarius Arm, a section of the galaxy previously deemed too volatile for proper civilization. You may do as you wish there, without Council interference. You're banishing us to the galactic equivalent of Australia, Harrison said flatly. I do not understand that reference, but I sense it is historically accurate. The Council has prepared a data package outlining the resources available in your new territory. You have 1 galactic standard year to relocate all human settlements, outposts, and vessels from Council space. Harrison stared at the towering alien for a long moment, before a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. You know what? Fine. We'll go to your too volatile arm of the galaxy. But remember this moment, Counselor. Remember that you sent us away because we were too unpredictable, too innovative, too human for your precious stability. He took a step forward. And in 20 years, when you're begging to trade with us, I'll personally remind you of this conversation. Cathar's crystalline eyes flickered with what might have been uncertainty. The Council's decision is final, Ambassador. This meeting is adjourned. As the hologram faded, Harrison stood alone in the now empty chamber, already composing the message he would send to Earth. It began, well, they finally did it. But trust me when I say, they're going to regret it. The eviction notice. The news of humanity's banishment spread across Earth and her colonies like wildfire. Or more accurately, like a particularly juicy piece of gossip at an interstellar high school. The reactions were as varied as humanity itself. Some panicked. What do you mean, banished? Demanded General Thompson of the United Earth Defense Force, slamming her fist on the conference table hard enough to make the holographic projections jump. We have settlements on over 40 worlds, mining operations on 100 more. Do they expect us to just pack up and leave? Some were philosophical. Historically speaking, Professor Alvarez mused during an emergency academic summit, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Being forced to relocate has often led to remarkable innovations for displaced populations. Though I admit, no population has ever been displaced across quite so many light years before. And some, perhaps the most quintessentially human, were immediately looking for the angle. So they're giving us an entire arm of the galaxy? Lydia Webb, CEO of Webb Industries, asked with a calculating gleam in her eye. Exclusively? No competition, no regulations, no council bureaucracy? Just to be clear, they're punishing us with freedom? The emergency session of the United Earth government lasted for 72 hours straight. Tempers flared. Coffee was consumed by the gallon. and at least one representative had to be physically restrained when they suggested surrendering human autonomy in exchange for remaining in council space. In the end, it was Dr. Emerson who cut through the chaos with characteristic bluntness. "For God's sake, people, do I need to remind you what species we are?" The renowned xenosociologist pushed her glasses up her nose with an impatient gesture. "We're humans. We landed on our moon because someone said it would be hard. We split the atom because we were curious. We developed faster-than-light travel because someone calculated it was theoretically possible. And now, the stuck-up council thinks banishing us to the volatile section of the galaxy is going to what? Break our spirit? Make us beg to come back?" She snorted derisively. "The Sagittarius arm isn't a punishment. It's an opportunity. No more tiptoeing around council regulations. No more filing requests in triplicate to mine an uninhabited asteroid. No more apologizing for solving problems in ways the council's precious algorithms didn't predict." A thoughtful silence fell over the chamber. "The council has always been afraid of us," she continued more quietly. "Not because we're violent. The Kreks are far more aggressive. Not because we're technologically advanced. The Solari outpace us in dozens of fields. They're afraid because we're adaptable in ways they cannot comprehend. Where they see chaos, we see possibility." President Okafor, who had remained silent throughout much of the debate, finally spoke. "So you're suggesting we embrace this banishment?" "I'm suggesting we stop calling it a banishment and start calling it what it is." Dr. Emerson grinned. "The greatest exploratory opportunity in human history, and that, as they say, was that." The next day, President Okafor addressed humanity across 1,000 worlds with a simple message. "The Council has given us 1 year to leave their space. We'll do it in 6 months, not because they demand it, but because we have better things to do with our time than linger where we're not appreciated. They've given us the Sagittarius arm as our territory. We're going to turn it into our home." The Great Migration, as it would later be called, was a logistical nightmare of unprecedented scale. Millions of humans and trillions of tons of equipment needed to be relocated across vast distances. It should have been impossible. Humanity completed it with 2 months to spare. Council observers watched in disbelief as humans dismantled entire colonies with ruthless efficiency, often leaving nothing behind but terraforming improvements and a handful of satirical graffiti messages. Mining outposts that had taken years to establish were broken down, packed up, and moved in weeks. "How are they doing this?" demanded Sub-Councillor Vex as she reviewed the latest reports. "Their production capacity has somehow increased 4-fold since the banishment decree." Cathar, who had been unusually quiet since issuing the banishment, simply observed. "They perform best when challenged. It is their most admirable and most troubling quality." And it wasn't just governments and corporations leading the charge. Individual humans embraced the migration with enthusiasm that bewildered council sociologists. Families packed up and headed for the new frontier. Universities established campuses on unexplored worlds. Artists created massive works celebrating humanity unbound. The message was clear. If the Council didn't want humanity in their neat, orderly galactic society, humanity would build something better. As the deadline approached, Ambassador Harrison delivered humanity's official response to the Council. It was considerably shorter than the Council's original banishment decree. It read simply, "We're leaving early. Thanks for the push. You know where to find us if you need anything. You will." Cathar found the message distinctly ominous. Making a home in the uninhabitable, the Sagittarius arm had been deemed too volatile for proper civilization by the Council for several very good reasons. Unstable star systems prone to unpredictable solar flares. Higher concentrations of black holes and neutron stars creating navigational hazards. Resource-rich planets with extreme climate conditions. Ancient, abandoned technology of unknown origins scattered across dozens of systems. In other words, it was a playground for human ingenuity. Would you look at that? Dr. Anwar whistled appreciatively as the sensors on the survey ship Opportunity mapped the electrical storms raging across the surface of Proxima Sagittarii 3. Those discharges are releasing enough energy to power a major colony for months, if we could harness them. Captain Reynolds peered at the readings with considerably less enthusiasm. Those same discharges would fry our landing craft before we got within 10 kilometers of the surface. Dr. Anwar grinned. "Only if we try to land in them. I'm thinking more along the lines of surfing above them." "Surfing," Reynolds repeated flatly. "Above electrical storms powerful enough to disable a capital ship." "Atmospheric skimmers." Dr. Anwar was already sketching designs on her tablet. "We position collecting arrays in the upper atmosphere. Let them ride the electrical currents without getting close enough for a direct hit. The energy differential alone would generate induction without physical contact. Reynolds finished, beginning to see the possibility. It's still incredibly dangerous. Compared to what? Being homeless in space? Dr. Anwar shrugged. Besides, I already have 3 safety redundancies in mind. 6 months later, the first atmospheric energy collection array went online above Proxima Sagittarii 3. Within a year, similar arrays were operating above 11 uninhabitable worlds, providing enough power to support the first wave of major settlements in the Sagittarius arm. The Council had expected humanity to struggle with the harsh conditions of their new territory. Instead, humans treated each challenge as an intellectual puzzle to be solved, often in ways that made Council scientists question their own fundamental assumptions. Take New Anchorage, humanity's first major settlement on the ice planet officially designated HC 2547, but quickly renamed Phrygia by its inhabitants. Humans had never been particularly fond of alphanumeric designations. The surface temperature averaged 95 degrees. Council environmental guidelines classified anything below 40 degrees as unsuitable for long-term habitation without extensive artificial environments. Humans looked at Phrygia and saw something different. Unlimited natural refrigeration, crystal-clear ice that could be sculpted into structures stronger than steel when properly treated, and thermal gradients that could be exploited for energy generation. Instead of building traditional domed habitats, they burrowed into the ice itself, creating a sprawling subglacial city illuminated by bioluminescent algae, genetically modified, of course, another practice the Council had restricted. Thermal exchange systems used the extreme surface cold to generate power rather than fighting against it. Within 3 years, New Anchorage had a population of over 5 million, and had become the center for human cryonic research and quantum computing. The extreme cold created ideal conditions for the latter, giving humanity a sudden, significant advantage in computational power. When the first Council intelligence operatives inevitably infiltrated New Anchorage, disguised as independent traders, they sent back reports that their superiors initially refused to believe. "They're ice skating for recreation," one report noted with apparent bewilderment. "Voluntarily exposing themselves to the cold for enjoyment. Children are making snow angels on the surface during designated play periods. They appear to be thriving." The volatility of the Sagittarius arm wasn't limited to environmental extremes. The region had a higher concentration of intelligent native species, most pre-spaceflight, some barely pre-industrial, than any other section of the galaxy. The Council had quarantined these worlds, designating them as developing independently and prohibiting any contact that might influence their natural evolution. Humanity took one look at this policy and collectively replied, "Well, that's patronizing as hell." The Diplomacy Corps, a new organization formed specifically for the Sagittarius arm, developed a radically different approach. Instead of isolation, they offered partnership, but only when invited, and always with the understanding that each species would develop on its own terms. On Terek Prime, where the silicon-based Terrakians had just developed rudimentary radio technology, the first human delegation arrived bearing no advanced technology, only knowledge, freely shared. "We won't give you our tools," Ambassador Kim explained to the Terrakian Council of Elders. "Tools without understanding lead to dependency. But we'll teach you about the principles behind them, and you can develop your own tools based on your own needs and values." The approach was controversial even among humans. Some argued it violated the spirit of non-interference. Others worried it placed too much responsibility on developing civilizations. But the results were undeniable. Within a decade, 7 previously isolated species had joined what was now being called the Sagittarius Cooperative. Not as subjects or protectorates, but as genuine partners, each contributing their unique perspectives and evolutionary advantages to the growing network of worlds. The Terrakians, it turned out, had an intuitive understanding of crystalline computing that revolutionized human data storage systems. The aquatic Mur of Delta Cygni contributed biological insights that transformed human medicine. The philosophically advanced but technologically limited Aeon provided ethical frameworks that helped the rapidly expanding human civilization maintain its moral compass. Where the Council saw primitive species to be protected from outside influence, humanity saw potential allies with valuable contributions, if approached with respect rather than paternalism. This difference in philosophy would prove crucial in the years to come. The derelict fleet, 5 years into humanity's banishment, Captain Olivia Takahashi of the exploration vessel Magellan made a discovery that would change everything. Deep in the largely uncharted Cygnus X region, Her ship's sensors detected an anomalous energy signature emanating from what appeared to be an empty sector of space. After careful approach, the Cygnus X region was notorious for spatial distortions that could tear ships apart. The Magellan found itself facing something impossible. Ships. Hundreds of them. Perhaps thousands. Ancient vessels of varying designs, all apparently powered down but intact, floating in a perfect holding pattern around a small artificial planetoid. "It's a fleet," Takahashi whispered as the visual came up on the main screen. An entire fleet in hibernation. Her science officer, Dr. Okonkwo, was already analyzing the sensor readings with growing excitement. "Carbon dating from the hull material suggests they're at least 50,000 years old, Captain. Possibly much older. And they're not dead, they're dormant. Minimal power signatures, but definitely active on some level." "Any match with known civilizations?" Takahashi asked, though she already suspected the answer. "None," Okonkwo confirmed. "But there are similarities to some of the abandoned technology we found scattered throughout the arm. I think we just found the owners." The discovery was immediately classified at the highest level. Within weeks, a research flotilla had established itself in the region, carefully studying the derelict fleet without disturbing it. The findings sent shockwaves through human society. The ships belonged to a civilization that had apparently vanished from the galaxy long before humanity had mastered fire. The technology was beyond advanced. It was transformative. Propulsion systems that didn't just bend space but rewrote its fundamental properties. Energy generation through methods that current physics classified as theoretically impossible. Materials with properties that defied conventional analysis. Most intriguing of all was the central planetoid. It wasn't a natural formation but a massive data repository, what humans might call a library or archive. And it was still operational. President Okafor convened an emergency session of the Sagittarius Cooperative Leadership to address the discovery. "We've confirmed 2 critical facts," Dr. Emerson reported to the assembled leaders. "First, this civilization, we're calling them the precursors for now, didn't die out or destroy themselves. They left, deliberately. The fleet was placed in standby mode, apparently intended to be reactivated someday." "Left for where?" asked Tarakian Elder Kavin, his crystalline form shimmering with curiosity. "Unknown, possibly another galaxy entirely." Emerson displayed a holographic model of unusual spatial readings surrounding the fleet. "The second critical fact is that the Council knows about the precursor fleet. They've known for at least 1,000 years. This revelation triggered an uproar among the assembled leaders. "They knew of this treasure trove of knowledge and technology, and they hid it?" demanded Prime Speaker Azul of the Mer, her translator barely keeping up with her rapid, indignant clicks and whistles. "Not just hid it," Emerson corrected grimly. "Quarantined it. The spatial distortions surrounding the Cygnus X region aren't natural. They're artificial barriers created using precursor technology. Technology the Council must have recovered and reverse-engineered to some degree. They've been actively preventing anyone from finding the fleet." Philosopher King Thalos of the Aeon raised a delicate hand. "One must consider their reasoning. Perhaps they feared what such advanced technology might do in the wrong hands." "Or in any hands other than theirs," President Okafor said quietly. "We've found references in the Precursor Archive to something they called the Divergence, a philosophical split between those who believed advanced technology should be carefully regulated and those who believed in unrestricted innovation. The ideological ancestors of the Council versus the ideological ancestors of humanity," Dr. Emerson added. "Except the precursors found a way to coexist. The Council, it seems, preferred suppression." The debate over what to do with the precursor fleet raged for weeks. Some advocated immediate activation, claiming the technology as the rightful inheritance of all sentient species. Others counseled caution, fearing unintended consequences from technology they barely understood. In the end, humanity did what humanity had always done best. They compromised, innovated, and adapted. They wouldn't activate the entire fleet. Not yet. But they would carefully study it, learn from it, and selectively implement technologies that could be properly understood and safely controlled. The first breakthrough came within months. The spatial boundary negator, reverse-engineered from the barrier technology the Council had used to hide the fleet. The SBN didn't just allow ships to pass through spatial distortions unharmed, it let them navigate them, use them, even create them. Suddenly, the volatile navigational hazards of the Sagittarius Arm became humanity's greatest advantage. Ships equipped with SBN technology could travel through regions that would destroy conventional vessels, effectively creating private highways through space that only cooperative ships could safely use. The second breakthrough was even more significant. the precursor data processing methodology that humans dubbed quantum neural interfacing. It wasn't artificial intelligence as humans had conceived of it. It was something far more elegant, a genuine bridge between organic thought processes and quantum computational power. Within 2 years of these initial breakthroughs, the Sagittarius Cooperative had leaped ahead of Council space technologically in several critical domains. Trade networks expanded exponentially as transit times decreased. Communication systems achieved near instantaneous transmission across vast distances. Energy production capacity increased 1,000-fold. And the Council, watching from afar through their intelligence networks, began to worry. The diplomatic incident. 7 years after the banishment, Sub-Councillor Vex found herself in the uncomfortable position of requesting a meeting with human representatives. Not demanding, not summoning, but requesting. A subtle but significant shift in diplomatic language that was not lost on the humans who received the communication. The meeting took place on Concordia, a neutral trading outpost established on the border between Council space and the Sagittarius Arm. Ambassador Harrison, now Foreign Secretary Harrison, represented humanity, a choice that made Cathar distinctly uncomfortable when he learned of it. Secretary Harrison, Vex began with careful formality. The Council appreciates your willingness to meet during this transitional period for both our civilizations. Harrison smiled pleasantly. Always happy to chat with old friends, Sub-Councillor. Though, I must say, 7 years seems a long time between social calls. Vex's translator struggled to capture the layers of irony in Harrison's tone, but the message was clear enough. The Council has been monitoring the development of the... what are you calling it now? The Sagittarius Cooperative? Monitoring? Harrison raised an eyebrow. That's a polite term for espionage. Vex made a gesture her species used to indicate dismissal of an irrelevant point. The Council has noticed significant technological advancements within cooperative space. Advancements that appear to exceed the natural development curve of your species or any known species within your alliance. I'm shocked to discover the Council keeps development curves for all known species. Harrison replied, placing a hand over his heart in mock astonishment. And here I thought we were special. Secretary Harrison, please. Vex's tone shifted to one of genuine concern. The technologies you are implementing, particularly your new navigational systems and energy production methods, bear concerning similarities to restricted technological paradigms. Harrison's expression hardened slightly. Restricted by whom, Sub-Councillor? We're no longer under Council jurisdiction, as you so clearly established 7 years ago. We operate under our own laws now. Some principles transcend jurisdictional boundaries, Vex insisted. The technologies we're developing, Harrison interrupted, are helping us thrive in the uninhabitable region you relegated us to. They're helping species you abandoned to isolation join a cooperative community of mutual respect and advancement. They're creating prosperity where the Council saw only volatility and risk. Vex's appendages made a nervous gesture. The Council is prepared to discuss the possibility of revised relations with humanity. Perhaps even a special status arrangement that would allow limited reintegration with Council space. There it was, the real purpose of the meeting. Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying the alien diplomat with newfound understanding. You're not worried about our technological development. You're worried about competition. The galactic economy is a delicate... 7 years ago, you told me humanity would never fit into your perfect, orderly galactic society. Harrison continued as if Vex hadn't spoken. You were right. We don't fit into established patterns. We create new ones. And now that those new patterns are proving successful, now that species are leaving Council space to join our cooperative, now you want to talk. Vex's translator couldn't quite capture the complex harmonics of her response, but the general sentiment came through clearly enough. Frustration mixed with grudging respect. The Council is prepared to make significant concessions, she finally said. Harrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's generous, but you misunderstand the situation, Sub-Councillor. We're not interested in concessions. We're not interested in special status arrangements. We're not interested in limited reintegration. He leaned forward. We're building something better than the Council ever offered us. Something based on partnership rather than patronage. Innovation rather than regulation. Cooperation rather than control. We don't want back into your system. We've outgrown it. The rest of the meeting was brief and frosty. Vex returned to Council space with the unsettling knowledge that the balance of power had shifted in ways the Council's vaunted prediction algorithms had failed to anticipate. Harrison returned to cooperative space with confirmation of what human intelligence had already suspected. The Council was getting nervous. That nervousness turned to alarm over the next 3 years as the Cooperative's influence continued to expand. Trade agreements with independent systems on the fringes of Council space. Cultural exchange programs that made the rigid Council society seem stagnant by comparison. A steady stream of scientists, artists, and entrepreneurs leaving Council worlds for the opportunities of the Wild Arm, as the Sagittarius region was now colloquially known. The Council's response was predictable. Increased restrictions on travel between Council space and the Cooperative. Propaganda about the chaotic and dangerous conditions in human territory. Economic sanctions against systems that engaged in unrestricted trade with cooperative worlds. And most concerning, a military buildup along the border regions. They're preparing for containment operations, General Thompson reported during an emergency security briefing. The Council has increased military vessel production by 300% in the last year alone. They're retrofitting civilian ships with weapon systems. They're activating reserve units that haven't seen service in centuries. President Okafor, now in her second term, studied the holographic display showing Council fleet movements. They wouldn't risk open conflict. The Council's entire philosophy is built on stability and order. War is the antithesis of that. With respect, Madam President, Dr. Emerson countered. What they fear more than disorder is irrelevance. The Council has maintained dominance through technological suppression disguised as responsible regulation. We've broken that model by sharing advancement rather than hoarding it. They see that as an existential threat. So what do we do? Asked Tarakian Elder Kavin, who had become humanity's closest ally on the Cooperative Leadership Council. Our military capacity, while improved, cannot match the combined forces of the Council. Foreign Secretary Harrison, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the meeting, finally spoke up. We don't need to match them. We just need to make conflict so unappealing that they'll be forced to negotiate. How? General Thompson demanded. We can't outgun them. Harrison smiled. No, but we can outthink them. And I have a plan that is so quintessentially human. The Council's prediction algorithms won't even consider it a possibility. Which is? President Okafor prompted. We're going to give them exactly what they want, Harrison replied, in a way that gives us everything we want. The room fell silent as he outlined his audacious strategy. The Council's miscalculation, High Councilor Cathar was not accustomed to feeling uncertain. The Council's governing systems were built on predictability, on carefully managed progress, on risks calculated to 15 decimal places before action was authorized. Yet as he studied the latest reports from the border regions, uncertainty was the predominant emotion registering in his neural clusters. They're pulling back, he noted to the assembled High Council. Human vessels are retreating from contested regions. Mining operations near Council space are being shut down. They're even reducing power output from their new energy systems in border sectors. As we anticipated, Sub-Councilor Vex observed, though her voice lacked conviction. Our show of strength has reminded them of the realities of galactic power dynamics. Perhaps, Cathar acknowledged. But it seems unlike them. Humans have historically responded to pressure by pushing back harder, not by retreating. Their behavioral patterns have always been erratic, another counselor dismissed. That's why they were relocated in the first place. Cathar wasn't convinced. Erratic, yes, but consistently so. There's a pattern to their unpredictability. They become more aggressive when threatened, not less. This compliance is concerning. Even as the Council debated, events were unfolding that would force their hand. Reports began to arrive from systems throughout Council space. Reports of unusual energy signatures, quantum fluctuations that defied standard analysis, brief but measurable distortions in subspace communications. At first, the incidents were dismissed as instrumentation errors, then as natural phenomena, then, as they increased in frequency and intensity, as potential cooperative provocations. It wasn't until a routine patrol near the Cygnus border detected a massive energy surge that the truth became impossible to ignore. The patrol's sensors captured clear readings of a human vessel, not a warship, but a civilian science vessel, utilizing an advanced form of the technology the Council had spent centuries suppressing. They've done it, Cathar said quietly as he reviewed the sensor logs. They've activated precursor technology on a scale we never dared attempt. The implications were staggering. The Cooperative wasn't retreating. They were advancing so rapidly that they no longer needed contested border regions. They had leapfrogged the Council's carefully managed technological development, achieving in a decade what the Council had been deliberately preventing for millennia. The council convened an emergency session to determine their response. The debate was uncharacteristically heated, with factions forming along lines that hadn't existed in council politics for generations. Some advocated immediate military intervention, strike now, before human technological superiority became insurmountable. Others argued for rapid technological advancement of their own, abandoning millennia of cautious development in favor of desperate innovation. Cathar, to the surprise of many, advocated a third option. "We have miscalculated," he admitted, his harmonics carrying the rare tone of contrition. "Our decision to banish humanity was based on the assumption that isolation would limit their development, and eventually force them to accept council authority on our terms. We failed to consider that their greatest strengths, adaptability, innovation, cooperative diversity, would flourish without our restrictions." "What are you suggesting, High Counselor?" Vex asked, her appendages signaling alarm at his apparent capitulation. "I am suggesting that for the first time in the Council's history, we must acknowledge that our fundamental approach may be flawed," Cathar replied. "The cooperative isn't just implementing forbidden technology. They're creating a new paradigm for interspecies relations, one that is proving more dynamic, more productive, and ultimately more sustainable than our own." The uproar that followed nearly crashed the Council's translation systems, as dozens of species tried to speak simultaneously. When order was finally restored, Cathar continued. "I propose we send a formal delegation to the cooperative leadership. Not to threaten, not to demand, but to genuinely engage. To learn. Perhaps even to apologize." The proposal was so radical that several councillors immediately called for Cathar's removal from office. Yet as the debate continued, an unsettling reality became clear. The Council's options were rapidly diminishing. Military action risked catastrophic consequences against an adversary with increasingly superior technology. Economic sanctions were proving ineffective against the cooperative's self-sufficient network. Continued isolation would only widen the technological gap. In the end, pragmatism prevailed over pride. A delegation would be sent, not with demands, but with an invitation to open dialogue. Cathar insisted on leading the delegation himself, over the objections of his security advisors. "I initiated this conflict," he said firmly. "It is appropriate that I take the risks necessary to resolve it." 3 days later, a council diplomatic vessel crossed into cooperative space under formal invitation, carrying Cathar and representatives from 17 council species. Their destination, New Terra, the heart of human space and capital of the Sagittarius Cooperative, a new galactic order. The council delegation expected to find a militarized society preparing for conflict. What they found instead was so disorienting that several members required medical attention to manage their species-specific stress responses. New Terra was a world that shouldn't exist by council standards, transformed from a barely habitable rock to a thriving ecosphere in less than a decade. Cities that merged seamlessly with natural landscapes. Energy systems that operated at efficiencies the council had deemed theoretically impossible. But more unsettling than the technological achievements was the social reality. Species that should have been pre-industrial working alongside humans in advanced research facilities. Cultural integration that maintained distinct identities while creating genuine community. A system that somehow balanced rapid advancement with ethical constraints, not through imposed regulation, but through shared values and transparent governance. "This shouldn't work," Sub-Councillor Vex muttered as their shuttle descended toward the cooperative government complex. "Social cohesion requires standardized regulatory frameworks. Innovation at this pace should produce cultural fragmentation. Interspecies cooperation at this level should be undermined by evolutionary self-interest." And yet, Cathar observed quietly, it does work. The diplomatic reception was elaborate but not ostentatious. President Okafor greeted the council delegation personally, extending formal welcome with a warmth that seemed genuine despite the history between their civilizations. "High Counselor Cathar," she said, switching to council standard out of courtesy, though the cooperative had developed translation systems far more sophisticated than the council's. "Your willingness to come in person speaks to your wisdom and courage. Welcome to New Terra." Cathar performed the council's highest ceremonial gesture of respect, one that had not been used in diplomatic exchanges for over 3 centuries. "President Okafor, the council acknowledges the extraordinary achievements of humanity and the cooperative you have built. We come seeking understanding and, if acceptable, reconciliation." The formal discussions that followed were unprecedented in galactic history, not just for their content, but for their structure. Instead of the carefully scripted positional negotiations typical of council diplomacy, the cooperative representatives engaged in open, dynamic dialogue. They acknowledged problems candidly, They admitted uncertainties. They invited council representatives to tour facilities, ask questions of any citizen, observe any aspect of cooperative society without restriction. Most shocking of all to the council delegation was the presentation on the precursor technology. We've been gradually activating and implementing systems from the Cygnus fleet, Dr. Emerson explained as she guided the delegation through holographic models of the technology. But we've established strict ethical protocols for each implementation, transparent testing, distributed benefits, and most importantly, choice. Choice? Cathar questioned. No world, no species, no individual is required to adopt any technology they're uncomfortable with, Emerson clarified. The cooperative operates on informed consent, not mandated progress. But surely this creates inefficiencies, Vex objected. Disparities between communities that adopt technologies and those that reject them. Of course it does, Emerson agreed cheerfully. And those inefficiencies and disparities create opportunities for innovative solutions, cultural exchange, and specialized development paths that might never emerge in a perfectly uniform system. Your quest for consistency eliminated the creative friction that drives genuine advancement. Over 3 days of intensive discussions, the core philosophical differences between the Council and the Cooperative became increasingly clear. Where the Council valued stability above all, the Cooperative valued potential. Where the Council sought to eliminate risk, the Cooperative sought to manage it through resilience and redundancy. Where the Council imposed order from above, the Cooperative allowed order to emerge from collaborative chaos. On the final day, Foreign Secretary Harrison, who had maintained a conspicuously low profile throughout the proceedings, finally joined the discussions. High Counselor, he greeted Cathar with a knowing smile. It's been, 10 years since our last conversation? The one where you told me humanity would never fit into proper galactic society? Cathar's crystalline eyes refracted light in a pattern that Harrison now recognized as rueful acknowledgement. Your memory is as precise as ever, Secretary Harrison. I believe I made you a promise during that conversation. Harrison continued. Something about reminding you of it when you came begging to trade with us. Though I must say, I didn't expect quite such a high-level delegation. We are not here to beg, Cathar said stiffly. No, Harrison agreed, his tone softening. You're here to understand. And that's something much more valuable than what I imagined 10 years ago. Cathar studied the human for a long moment. You anticipated this outcome. The retreat from border regions, the energy fluctuations throughout Council space, they were deliberate. You wanted us to witness your technological advancement without perceiving it as a direct threat. Harrison shrugged. Humans have a saying, it's better to be invited in than to break down the door. We could have forced a confrontation, but that would have led to conflict, suffering, resentment, all the things the Cooperative was founded to overcome. We preferred to create circumstances that would lead to a diplomatic solution. Manipulative, Vex muttered. Strategic, President Okafor corrected. And ultimately, compassionate. We don't want to replace the Council or destroy it. We want to transform the relationship between our civilizations into something mutually beneficial. Cathar made a gesture that his species used to indicate profound respect. What you propose would require fundamental changes to the Council's operating principles. Many will resist. Of course they will, Harrison agreed. Change is hard, but necessary, and I think you already know that, or you wouldn't be here. The final agreement reached between the Council delegation and Cooperative leadership was not a treaty in the traditional sense. It was a framework for ongoing dialogue, cultural exchange, and cautious technological sharing. It acknowledged the philosophical differences between their civilizations without demanding convergence. Most significantly, it created a new category in galactic politics. Independent allied space, regions that would maintain their own governance systems while participating in a shared economic and scientific community. The Sagittarius Cooperative would remain autonomous, neither rejoining Council space, nor remaining isolated from it. The Council would gradually reform its restrictions on technological development, guided by ethical frameworks developed collaboratively with cooperative advisors. And species throughout the galaxy would gain something they had never truly had before. Genuine choice about which system better suited their needs and values. As the Council delegation prepared to depart, Cathar requested a private meeting with Harrison. I must ask, the High Counselor said when they were alone, if this outcome was truly your goal from the beginning. Did you foresee all of this when you smiled at me 10 years ago and warned that we would regret banishing humanity? Harrison laughed. God, no. We were just angry and defiant back then. We wanted to prove you wrong out of pure spite. Then how did you arrive at this remarkably mature approach? The same way humans have always found our best path forward, Harrison replied. We stumbled around in the dark, made a bunch of mistakes, argued constantly among ourselves, and somehow collectively lurched toward a better solution than any of us could have designed intentionally. Cathar's translation device struggled to interpret his response, eventually settling on, "That is simultaneously the most frightening and most hopeful explanation I could imagine." That's humanity in a nutshell, Harrison agreed. Terrifying potential harnessed by hopeful cooperation. You weren't wrong to fear us, Cathar, but you were wrong to think fear was the only appropriate response. Epilogue. 20 years later, the observation deck of the cooperative diplomatic vessel New Horizon offered a spectacular view of the galactic core as the ship maintained position at the ceremonial midpoint between Council and cooperative space. Ambassador Devin Harrison, son of the now-retired Foreign Secretary Harrison, stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the final preparations for the historic event about to unfold. "Your father would be proud," President Thalos said as he joined the young ambassador at the viewport. The Aeon Philosopher King had been elected to the cooperative's highest office 5 years earlier, the first non-human to hold the position, though certainly not the last. "He's mostly amused," Devin replied with a smile. "Said something about cosmic irony before he left for the fishing trip he refused to cancel even for this ceremony." "Fitting," Thalos observed, his luminescent skin rippling with amusement. The architects of great change often prefer to watch their creations from a comfortable distance. The ceremony itself was brief but profound. High Counselor Cathar, who had transformed from humanity's greatest skeptic to its most powerful advocate within the Council, formally activated the new Galactic Assembly complex constructed in neutral space. Unlike the old Council chambers, which had emphasized hierarchy and separation, the Assembly was designed as a genuine forum where representatives from all civilizations, Council, Cooperative, and the growing number of independent allied systems could engage as equals. 20 years ago, Cathar addressed the gathered delegates, his aging voice carrying harmonics of wisdom earned through adaptation. "The Council made what we believed was a prudent decision to remove a disruptive influence from our carefully ordered society. We banished humanity to what we considered the galactic wilderness, expecting them to either fail or eventually return on our terms." His crystalline eyes swept across the chamber, taking in the extraordinary diversity of species now working together in ways the old Council could never have imagined. Instead, humanity did what humanity has always done. They adapted, they innovated, they cooperated, and most importantly, they shared. Where we saw threats, they created opportunities. Where we built walls, they built bridges. Where we enforced uniformity, they celebrated diversity. Cathar raised all 8 of his appendages in the ceremonial gesture that, in Council tradition, acknowledged transformative wisdom. "The Galactic Assembly we inaugurate today is not a human institution or a Council institution. It is something new, something that could only emerge from the creative friction between our different approaches to civilization. It preserves the stability and thoughtfulness the Council has always valued, while embracing the adaptability and potential that humanity champions." Devin Harrison listened to the High Counselor's speech with a diplomatic smile that masked his true emotions. His father had told him stories about the original banishment his entire life, about the indignity, the anger, the defiance that had driven those first human pioneers into the uninhabitable regions of the Sagittarius Arm. How strange that what had begun as punishment had led to this moment of genuine partnership. How typically human to turn exile into opportunity. As the ceremony concluded and representatives from 100 worlds mingled in the vast central chamber of the Assembly, Devin found himself approached by a young Council diplomat, a member of Cathar's species, though barely into adulthood by their standards. "Ambassador Harrison," the young diplomat greeted him with careful formality. "I am Junior Envoy Zakara. High Counselor Cathar suggested I introduce myself. I am to serve as liaison to the cooperative delegation." "A pleasure to meet you, Junior Envoy," Devin replied warmly. "Though I'm curious, why did the High Counselor specifically direct you to me?" Zakara's crystalline eyes refracted light in a pattern that reminded Devin startlingly of his father's mischievous grin. "The High Counselor said I should tell you that, in human terms, he is hedging his bets. He believes I am, how did he phrase it? Troublingly unpredictable in my thinking, and therefore might better understand the human perspective." Devin laughed.
Sounds like Cathar has learned more from us than I realized. Indeed, Zakara agreed.
He told me that the greatest wisdom he gained from humanity was that true stability doesn't come from eliminating chaos, but from harnessing it. That civilization advances not by perfect planning, but by constructive disruption followed by thoughtful integration. Devon glanced across the chamber at Cathar, who was observing their interaction with evident satisfaction. "Well, Junior Envoy Zakara," Devon said, raising his glass in a toast toward the High Counselor, "to constructive disruption." "And thoughtful integration," Zakara added, mimicking the human gesture with remarkable accuracy. Across the vast expanse of the galaxy, countless species were waking to a new reality, one neither rigidly controlled nor chaotically unstructured, but dynamically balanced between order and innovation, stability and potential. And in a small cabin on a fishing vessel floating on a lake in the mountains of Earth, retired Foreign Secretary Harrison sat with a contented smile, tracking the ceremony on a simple data pad before setting it aside to cast his line into the pristine waters. "How'd it go?" his fishing companion asked without looking up from her own line. "About how we hoped," Harrison replied. "Maybe better." Dr. Emerson, also long retired from her role as humanity's foremost xenosociologist, nodded appreciatively. Not bad for a species the Council deemed too unpredictable to participate in proper galactic society. Harrison's smile widened as he watched the sun setting over the mountains, Earth Mountains, the ancient guardians of humanity's first home. "I still have the original banishment decree somewhere in my personal archives," he mused. "Maybe we should have it framed and installed in the new assembly as a reminder." "Of what?" Emerson asked. Harrison cast his line with practiced ease, watching it arc gracefully across the golden-lit water. "That sometimes, the best thing that can happen to you is getting kicked out of someone else's idea of paradise. Forces you to build something better." The line settled onto the lake's surface with barely a ripple, like humanity's arrival in the great cosmic ocean, a quiet entrance that would create waves felt across the galaxy for millennia to come. The end. "You did what to the Kreshnar flagship?" Admiral Zivzaltor's upper appendages trembled with what could only be described as sheer horror. All four of his eye stalks extended to their full length as he stared at the human ambassador. Lieutenant Commander Natalie Brooks shrugged, taking another sip of her coffee. A substance that the Galactic Coalition had almost classified as a controlled psychoactive when they first encountered humans. "We blew it up." "Yes, I gathered that much." The Admiral's voice modulator clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme stress in Vornidian physiology. "What I'm struggling to comprehend is why you felt it necessary to use a Nova-class torpedo on a vessel that was already disabled and attempting to surrender." Natalie paused mid-sip. They were surrendering? Their communications array was broadcasting the universal surrender frequency for 37 standard time units before you... The Admiral couldn't even finish the sentence. "Huh." Natalie set down her mug on the conference table. "That explains the weird blinking lights. We thought they were charging their main cannon." The three other alien representatives at the Emergency Council meeting exchanged what humans might recognize as alarmed glances, despite their vastly different facial structures. "Commander Brooks," began Tlaxil, the Meraxian diplomat whose translucent skin allowed everyone to literally see his rising blood pressure. "Perhaps you could help us understand the human concept of proportional response?" Natalie tilted her head. "Proportional what now?" And that was the moment the Galactic Coalition realized they had a problem. Captain Emil Kovac stared at the holographic display, watching the recording for the third time as the Kreshnar flagship exploded into a miniature sun that briefly outshone the actual star it had been orbiting. "Damn," he whispered, a smile tugging at his lips before he caught himself. He was in trouble. Serious trouble. So why did he feel like high-fiving someone? The door to his quarters hissed open, and Lieutenant Commander Brooks strode in, looking surprisingly unruffled for someone who had just faced the wrath of the Coalition's highest-ranking officials. "How bad?" Emil asked, shutting off the display. "On a scale of 1 to 10? Natalie grabbed a chair, spun it around, and straddled it backward. "About a 17. And that's just because most of the diplomatic corps are too terrified to give us a higher number." "So they're mad." "No, mad is what my ex got when I sold his vintage guitar collection to fund my academy application. The Coalition is..." She gestured vaguely with both hands. "They're having an existential crisis." Emil rubbed his temples. "Because we destroyed one warship? Because we obliterated a surrendering vessel with enough firepower to crack a small moon. Apparently, that's not how things are done out here in the civilized galaxy." Natalie's air quotes around civilized were practically audible. The Kreshnar weren't exactly civilized when they glassed New Perth colony last month. That's what I said! Natalie slapped her hand on his desk. But get this, the Coalition seems to think there's supposed to be some kind of, I don't know, galactic gentleman's agreement about warfare. You blow up a colony, I blow up a colony. You shoot down a frigate, I shoot down a frigate. It's like they're playing chess while we're flipping the board and setting the pieces on fire. Emil leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more serious. So what happens now? Well, the good news is, the Kreshnar have suddenly become very interested in peace talks. And the bad news? Natalie's smile was sharp enough to cut. We've been formally invited to a galactic summit to discuss humanity's integration into the accepted protocols of interstellar conflict, which is diplomat speak for what the hell is wrong with you apes. When do we leave? 6 hours. And Captain, Admiral Ju says to leave the Nova-class torpedoes at home. Apparently they give the ambassadors anxiety. Emil snorted. Any other restrictions? Just one. Under no circumstances are we to use the phrase go big or go home during the negotiations. That's oddly specific. I may have said it, repeatedly, during my explanation of human military doctrine. Emil sighed. It was going to be a long summit. The Galactic Summit was held on Neutralis, a perfectly terraformed world that served as the Coalition's primary diplomatic hub. Its carefully cultivated gardens and mathematically precise architecture screamed, "We have evolved beyond your primitive conflicts," in a way that made most humans want to track mud through the hallways on principle. Emil and Natalie, along with a small delegation of Earth's diplomatic corps and military advisors, were led into a vast chamber. The room was arranged in a perfect circle, with representatives from 57 species seated according to their time of admission to the Coalition. Humanity's seats were right by the door. The message wasn't subtle. High Chancellor Orm Vidra, a being composed primarily of crystalline structures that shifted color with her moods, currently a troubled amber, rose from the central podium. "We welcome our human colleagues to this extraordinary session of the Galactic Coalition," she began, her voice resonating through the chamber without any apparent amplification. "The recent incident between human forces and the Kreshnar Dominion has raised concerns that must be addressed with utmost urgency." Emil leaned toward Dr. Thomas Alvarez, Earth's leading xenosociologist. "Is it just me, or did everyone inch away from us when we sat down?" "It's not just you," Thomas whispered back. "The Eridani delegate is literally hiding behind his environmental suit controls, and those guys evolved as apex predators." Natalie suppressed a snort. "Maybe he's just cold." "He's a methane-breathing life form who considers lava a refreshing dip," Thomas replied dryly. Chancellor Orm Vidra's crystals flashed an annoyed blue. "If the human delegation could give us their full attention." "Apologies, Chancellor," Emil said smoothly. "We're still adapting to the honor of being in such distinguished company." The Chancellor's color shifted back to amber. "Understandable. Now regarding the incident with the Kreshnar vessel. The one that was part of a fleet that wiped out 20,000 colonists on New Perth?" Natalie interjected, ignoring Emil's warning glance. An uncomfortable ripple passed through the chamber. "Yes, well," the Chancellor continued. "The Coalition recognizes that the Kreshnar incursion into human space was a serious violation of our charter. However, the response has been deemed disproportionate." "Disproportionate?" Emil echoed, his diplomatic facade slipping just a fraction. "Chancellor, with all due respect, the Kreshnar have been attacking human colonies for months. They refused all attempts at communication. They ignored formal warnings from both Earth Command and the Coalition itself." "This is true," acknowledged T'Pron, the Valarian representative whose species resembled nothing so much as sentient clouds of vapor. "However, there are established protocols for escalation of force. The deployment of a Nova-class weapon against a disabled vessel is unprecedented in the last 7 millennia of Coalition history." Natalie leaned forward. "So what would you have done?" The question seemed to catch the chamber off guard. "Pardon?" asked T'Pron, his vapor condensing slightly in what might have been confusion. "What would the Coalition have done in our position? The Kreshnar had already destroyed one colony and were moving toward another. Their technology jammed our long-range communications. We had one ship against their fleet of 7. Standard protocol would be to disable their propulsion and weapons systems, then call for Coalition peacekeeping forces," explained a reptilian delegate from the far side of the chamber. Emil couldn't help himself. And how long would that take? Hours? Days? Meanwhile, another human colony gets proportionately wiped out? The Chancellor's crystals darkened. Captain Kovac, your frustration is understandable, but no, I don't think you do understand, Emil interrupted, standing from his seat. Humanity has been fighting itself for thousands of years. We've gotten very, very good at it. And one thing we've learned is that sometimes the best way to prevent a prolonged conflict is to demonstrate, clearly and unambiguously, the cost of continuing to fight. By annihilating an enemy with excessive force? Asked Chancellor Orm Vedra, her crystals now pulsing with concerned red streaks. The concept of excessive force is culturally relative, Chancellor, Dr. Alvarez chimed in, his academic tone providing a momentary buffer to the tension. Humans don't actually have a word that directly translates to your concept of overkill. This was not strictly true, and Natalie had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. Thomas was playing the mysterious human customs card, and playing it beautifully. Surely that cannot be accurate, said the Meraxian diplomat Tlaxil. Your species has developed nuclear weapons, antimatter containment, and now Nova-class torpedoes. You must understand the concept of using more force than necessary. Oh, we understand using enough force to get the job done? Natalie replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But more than necessary. That implies there's an upper limit to necessary in the first place. The silence that followed was deafening. During a recess in the summit proceedings, Emil found himself in one of Neutralis's famous floating gardens, admiring the impossible physics of water flowing upward through transparent tubes to nourish hanging plants. He was trying to clear his head when he sensed someone approach. Your species continues to confound our behavioral predictions, came a melodic voice. Emil turned to find himself face to face, or face to whatever counted as a face, with Xanthal, the representative of the Ashirai collective. The Ashirai were among the oldest species in the coalition, mysterious beings who appeared as shifting patterns of light contained within robes of an impossibly black material. Ambassador Xanthal, Emil acknowledged with a respectful nod. I wasn't aware that your people took an interest in human affairs. We take an interest in anomalies, Captain Kovac, and humans are nothing if not anomalous. Emil chuckled. We get that a lot. I imagine you do. The patterns of light shifted into what might have been a contemplative configuration. Your Lieutenant Commander Brooks made an interesting point during today's session. The concept of necessary force is indeed culturally relative. And what do the Ashirai consider necessary force? We haven't engaged in physical conflict for over 20,000 of your years, Xanthal replied. We found other methods of resolution more efficient. Lucky you, Emil said, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from his voice. Humanity hasn't had that luxury. No, you haven't. Xanthal's lights pulsed thoughtfully. Your species evolved on a world of scarce resources and numerous predators. Your history is written in blood and fire. And yet, here you are among the stars, still carrying those ancient adaptations for a world that no longer exists. Emil frowned. With all due respect, Ambassador, those ancient adaptations are the reason we survived the Kreshnar attack. Indeed, and perhaps that is precisely why the Coalition finds you so disturbing. Because we defended ourselves? Because you did not merely defend yourselves, Captain. You sent a message, a very loud, very bright message that burned with the heat of a small star. Xanthal's lights sparkled in what Emil somehow knew was amusement. The Coalition species have spent millennia developing protocols, establishing boundaries, creating a civilization where conflicts are managed rather than won. And along come the humans, blowing things up. Precisely. You do not play by rules you never agreed to in the first place. The Ashirai's lights formed a complex pattern. It is refreshing in its way. Emil raised an eyebrow. You approve? I did not say that, but I understand. The Ashirai were once much like humans, quick to anger, quicker to act. We learned over time that there are more paths than the direct one. We're capable of diplomacy, Emil pointed out. We just don't start with it when our people are being killed. A fair position, though I suspect the real issue troubling the Coalition is not what you did, but what you might do next. Xanthal's lights dimmed slightly. A species that responds to one attack with such decisiveness. What might they do if truly threatened? How far would humans go to survive? The question hung in the air between them, and Emil had no good answer. Meanwhile, Natalie had found her way to what passed for a bar on Neutralis, a serene space where various beings sat on meditation cushions, while servers brought them beverages that allegedly altered consciousness in spiritually enlightening ways. Natalie had asked for whiskey. She received something that tasted like mint-flavored gasoline and made her left ear go numb. She was on her second glass.
"Is this seat taken?" asked a gravelly voice.
She looked up to find a Kreshnar standing beside her cushion. Her hand instinctively moved to where her sidearm would have been, had weapons been allowed on Neutralis.
"You've got some nerve," she said, not bothering to hide her hostility.
The Kreshnar, a tall exoskeletal being with 4 arms and compound eyes that glittered like oil on water, made a gesture that might have been conciliatory.
"I am Vraktor, Science Overseer for the Kreshnar Dominion. I am not military."
"That's supposed to make me feel better about the 20,000 humans your people killed?" "No." The Kreshnar sank onto a cushion, joints clicking. "Nothing could or should. I came to understand." Natalie snorted. "Understand what? How to better target human colonies next time?" "To understand why your species responded as you did. The military command expected you to retreat, to call for help from your allies. Instead, you deployed a weapon that our scientists believed was theoretical." Vraktor's mandibles clicked together. A weapon that, had it been deployed closer to a planetary body, could have caused an extinction-level event. "Yeah, well, we read the manual before we fired it." Natalie took another sip of her not whiskey. "Just far enough to make our point without cracking any planets. See? We can be restrained." "That is what troubles us. You knew exactly what you were doing." "Of course we did. What, did you think we just fire off superweapons at random?" "In some ways that would be less concerning." Vraktor's compound eyes fixed on her. "Random destruction can be predicted statistically. Calculated destruction with such precision suggests a species that has made an art form of violence." Natalie laughed, a sharp sound that turned heads throughout the bar. "An art form of violence? That's rich coming from a Kreshnar. Your people attacked us without provocation." "That was a mistake." "No kidding." "No, you misunderstand." Vraktor leaned closer, his voice dropping. "The military command attacked because they believed humans would be easy to subjugate, based on coalition reports of your technological development. They expected you to follow the same protocols of engagement that the rest of the galactic community observes." "Seems like a pretty basic research failure on your part." "Indeed. We did not study your history deeply enough. We did not understand that humans developed their technology primarily through warfare rather than cooperation. We did not realize that every human vessel is, in essence, a warship that sometimes performs other functions." Natalie considered this.
"So what are you saying?"
"I am saying that the Kreshnar Dominion will be formally apologizing to humanity tomorrow and offering significant reparations." Vraktor's mandibles twitched in what might have been embarrassment. "And I am personally saying that I hope never to see what humans consider to be actual warfare, as opposed to a single demonstration." Natalie smiled, cold and sharp. "That's probably wise." The next day's session of the summit was considerably more subdued. The Kreshnar delegation formally apologized for the attack on New Perth colony, offering both material reparations and territorial concessions that left many coalition members murmuring in surprise. Chancellor Orm Vedra, her crystals now a thoughtful green, addressed the chamber. "In light of these developments, the coalition must consider its position regarding humanity's place among us. While the response to the Kreshnar incursion was unorthodox by our standards, it has resulted in a swift resolution to a conflict that might otherwise have escalated." Emil stood. "Chancellor, if I may?" She nodded, crystals flickering curiously. "Humanity acknowledges that our methods may seem extreme to many coalition species. We come from a world where hesitation often meant extinction. But we're not just our past, we're also our aspirations for the future. If the coalition is willing to work with us, I believe we can find a middle path that respects both your protocols and our need to protect our people." The Chancellor's crystals brightened. "A reasonable proposal. What would you suggest?" "A cultural exchange program. Coalition observers on human vessels, human observers on coalition peacekeeping missions. We learn your ways, you learn ours, and maybe we find something better than either of us had before." The proposal sparked a flurry of discussion throughout the chamber. Eventually, after consultations with various delegation heads, Chancellor Orm Vedra returned to the center podium. "The coalition accepts this proposal in principle, with details to be determined by a joint committee. We also propose an additional measure, that humanity take responsibility for responding to situations where Decisive action may be required to prevent greater harm. Emil blinked in surprise. You want us to be your enforcers? The Chancellor's crystals shifted to a diplomatic blue. We prefer the term rapid response specialists. The Coalition has maintained peace for millennia, but we have done so primarily through consensus and negotiation. Recent events suggest that not all species respond to such methods. Natalie leaned toward Emil. They're scared of us, so they're putting us on their side. Smart. Indeed, murmured Dr. Alvarez. Classic incorporation of a potential threat into the power structure. Chancellor Orm Vedra continued. This arrangement would be mutually beneficial. The Coalition gains a deterrent against aggressors, while humanity gains allies, technology, and a framework for interstellar relations. Emil stood once more. Chancellor, the human delegation will need to consult with our government, but speaking personally, I believe this could be the beginning of a productive relationship. As the session concluded, Emil found Ambassador Xanthal waiting near the human delegation's exit. A clever resolution, Captain, the Asherai said, lights dancing. Though I wonder if the Coalition fully understands what they've just done. And what's that? They've legitimized human methods while simultaneously trying to constrain them. I am curious to see which influence proves stronger over time. Emil smiled. That makes two of us, Ambassador. 6 months later, the UNSC Vigilant hung in orbit above Earth, its newly expanded hull incorporating both human and Coalition technology. On the observation deck, Captain Emil Kovac and Lieutenant Commander Natalie Brooks stood side by side, watching a delegation of Coalition representatives board via shuttle. Ready for our first joint mission? Emil asked. As ready as our guests are going to let us be, Natalie replied, gesturing to the ship's schematics displayed on a nearby screen. They've implemented 17 different failsafes on our weapon systems. 17, Emil. Protocol. Bureaucracy, she countered. But I guess that's the price of admission. Emil turned from the viewport. You don't sound convinced this is going to work. Oh, it'll work. Natalie's expression was thoughtful. Just not the way they think it will. They believe they're civilizing us, teaching us restraint and proportion. And what do you think? I think they're learning something far more important from us. Which is? Natalie's smile was grim. That sometimes peace isn't kept by balanced responses and careful escalation. Sometimes peace is kept because everyone knows exactly what will happen if they break it. Emil considered this. You know, the ancient Romans had a saying, si vis pacem, para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war, Natalie translated. Exactly. The Coalition species developed their protocols because they could afford to. They had time, resources, safety. They forgot what it means to fight for survival. And we're supposed to remind them? Not remind them. Compliment them. They need us, Emil. They need someone who's willing to do what they can't or won't. Natalie turned back to the viewport, watching Earth rotate slowly beneath them. And maybe, just maybe, we need them to remind us that there are other ways to solve problems than blowing them up. Emil chuckled. Look at you, getting all philosophical. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain. She straightened her uniform. Now, shall we go welcome our new colleagues and explain why we absolutely, positively need to keep at least a few Nova-class torpedoes in the arsenal? For diplomacy's sake, of course. Of course, Emil agreed with a straight face. Nothing says let's be friends quite like a judiciously applied superweapon. As they left the observation deck, Emil couldn't help but wonder what the galaxy would make of humanity in 100 years, or 1,000. Would they eventually adopt the Coalition's measured approach? Or would the Coalition come to appreciate humanity's more direct methods? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The galaxy would never be quite the same now that humans had arrived on the scene. And whether that was cause for celebration or concern depended entirely on which side of humanity's friendship you found yourself. In the depths of uncharted space, a Kreshnar scout vessel observed the UNSC Vigilant departing Earth orbit, its enhanced sensors cataloging the modifications made to accommodate Coalition technology. Analysis complete, reported a technician to Fleet Commander Drezkor. The human vessel has retained 60% of its original armament while incorporating Coalition defensive systems. And the Nova-class weapons? Still present, Commander, though under apparent Coalition oversight protocols. Drezekor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Transmit the full report to High Command with my recommendation. Which is, Commander? That the Dominion formally request admission to the Coalition. Effective immediately. The technician's compound eyes flickered in surprise. Sir, the Dominion has rejected Coalition membership for centuries. The Dominion had not encountered humans for centuries, Drezikor replied simply. Tell me, technician, have you studied human history as I instructed our officers to do? Yes, Commander. Then you know that throughout their brief but violent history, one truth has remained constant. It is far better to be humanity's ally than its enemy. The technician nodded slowly. And if the Coalition has made humans their enforcers, then we would be fools to remain outside their protection. Drezikor turned back to the view screen, watching as the Vigilant engaged its FTL drive and vanished into the darkness of space. The humans have a saying, if you can't beat them, join them. I believe they may be the first species we've encountered who truly understands the Kreshnar mindset. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the galaxy, Chancellor Orm Vedra received the Kreshnar request for admission to the Coalition. Her crystalline form glowed with surprised yellow pulses before settling into a satisfied blue. Perhaps the humans' methods had merit after all. The end.